Welcome back, Chi. As I was talking about, that change is the only constant. Today's managers need new mindset. They need to talk about more flexibility. They need to talk about more speed. They need to talk about more innovation and continuously updating and upgrading themselves. For the purpose of elaboration, I'm taking you to the class of Stanford University. And there we're going to listen to the CEO of Siemens Corporation, and that CEO would be elaborating that how they are responding to the requirements of the changes in the external environment and how they actually planned the organizational development perspectives in their organization. And there you will be also witnessing that how the top management is involved in developing the mindset, how the top management is involved in creating the environment where the change is the highest priority factor for the organization. So for that matter, I have to switch off this slide share, and I have to share with you the video. I'm taking you to Stanford University, and we're going to see a very interesting demonstration by Siemens Corporation. It is about a 20 minutes clip, but it is very detailed and very much comprehensive, like in its orientation and discussion. So listen to this clip carefully, and afterwards I'll be sharing the whole clip on the Google Classroom as well.
Mr. Lusher, thank you very much for being with us here today. If we could start off, as Dean Salona said, you've worked in many different countries across the world and worked in many different businesses. Perhaps we could start by asking, are there some common threads that you've identified with all of the leaders that you've met that you would say define leadership for you?
I think there are many, many definitions of leaderships around the world, so I will not be the one who will add another one. But I mean, if you think about, maybe we can talk a little bit in terms of what I personally consider as key traits of good leaders. I think the first one I would say is clarity of direction and vision. Second one is, and that's probably a skill in itself, that how you break it then down in actionable steps, short-term, medium, and long-term, which is then linked to the capacity of the organization and to your competitive environment, what you're facing. So that you challenge the organization, that you challenge the environment, but you make the possible in the fastest time what you can and what you're able to implement. So how you execute well in this regard. The third one I would say is that you have to be absolutely passionate, because without passion you will not be able to rally your teams behind you. The fourth one I would say you have to be absolutely determined in pursuing what you have set out for the organization. And for me, the fifth one is, I would say, is that you have to have a true north for yourself, irrespective of company values or company culture, that you clearly define for yourself what's right and what's wrong. And then you are onto the field to play.
And onto the field, you were, as Dean Sloan said, the first outside CEO in Siemens history. I imagine that created some specific leadership challenges for you. Perhaps you could talk about these principles that you mentioned and how you applied those as you took over as CEO and president of Siemens.
I mean, who has actually read and worked through the case? Can you just show me my hands up? Well, I don't have to explain anything to you. I mean, obviously, it was a very defining moment for the company. It was a very defining moment for myself. I mean, I was the 12th CEO in the history of the company, the first one coming from the outside. And the company itself was in a major shock. So the first thing what I had to do is really to make sure that what happened to the organization was never part of the company culture. So the first thing what I set out for the organization to clearly differentiate that we had a major leadership crisis to deal with and to tackle with, but it was not a company culture issue per se what we had to deal with. So for me, to resolving this issue in the fastest possible time was obviously the highest priority. The second one is then when you are the first one coming from the outside in this way onto the management board, is that, you know, it's the natural things. I mean, who is this person? I didn't have a broad following in Germany because I spent all my life across the world. So the first question was actually, who is he? The second question probably was, will he bring his own team with him? Will he change everything what we have done in the past? Will he try to revolutionize the company or not? So I very clearly set out and said, Siemens doesn't need a revolution, but we will continue to have an evolution, but we will do this with speed, 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 speed. So the third element was then to tackle the first crisis, what I really had to deal with, and this is this whole corruption case and how to make sure that we deal with it in an extremely forceful, transparent, and open manner. And I knew that I had to bring in people from the outside to help me in this one. So my first key appointments in the organization were absolutely critical, and this was Peter Solmsen as the Chief Legal Counsel who worked with me in GE, and then also the Chief Compliance Officer, so that I had actually a team onto there who I can clearly trust and who can really work with the overall organization to tackle this most pressing issue what we have to deal with. And then you very quickly move on to really say, I wanted to have 100 days. I wanted to have 100 days for the simple reason that I wanted to really see as many people as I could, listen, travel around the world, engage the organization from the customer viewpoint, from the different parts of the world, get feedback, get input, and at the same time work then with my top leadership team, what has to be changed. And then the whole thing evolved around structural changes, leadership changes, and so on and so forth, and you have read the case, so I don't have to repeat all of it. But the initial part was very much making sure that I'm visible to as many people of the organization as possible. So I had a lot of skip-level meetings, for example. I made deliberate efforts that I made big town hall meetings all over the world where I've been on different sites, where I've met the young leaders of the organization, and so on and so forth, that I have really an interaction on a very different level of the organization, and that I also get an input from the customer viewpoint. So a classical day, if you ask me what is a classical day within Siemens, and I think it's probably still valid today, and this is what I have basically developed over many, many, many years. I come into the morning, basically start breakfast with a group of customers, followed by meeting with politicians or with single customers on big contracts. Then I go into having lunch with the young high potentials, me alone and nobody else. Then followed by business reviews, town hall meetings, and then a joint dinner with the top leadership team. And if you do this day after day, you get a very, very solid and very quick understanding what are the true issues and what you have to tackle on, and what are the most pressing one, what you have to deal with as a leader and as a leadership team.
And as Siemens has evolved over the last 3 years, it has 400,000 people across the world. How do you effect change when you have so many different businesses in so many different countries and so many individual people who you need to persuade and to get on board with the way you're thinking about the company?
I mean, the first thing is that you have to recognize that you have to rely on many, many other people. So you need to work, number one, with a united top leadership team. So the first issue what you have to deal with is how do you make sure that you really work with your team who you trust and who speaks with one voice in one direction and acts and speaks in the same way. So how do you quickly get basically different change agents in the organization who are really aligned with what you try to accomplish in the organization? And for this reason, the change what I've introduced in terms of the CEO principle was exactly this. to absolutely make sure that I had then the leaders in place who I trusted, who believed in the same vision, who worked in the same direction with the same speed, how I wanted to change happening in the organization. And then through the principle that I've just announced, and I'm traveling 70% of my time being in front of the organization as much as you can yourself, because there's nothing more important than the personal and direct dialogue with the teams around the world.
And as you've evolved as a leader, if we broaden it out just beyond Siemens, could you talk perhaps about how your personal style of leadership has evolved over time, and as you've encountered different challenges in the different companies you've worked in, how has that caused you to reflect on your personal style of leadership?
I think it's a very, I mean, look at this crowd. I always look at all of you. I mean, you are probably, how many nations are here in Stanford? 50 nations. So you see, my grandmother is Italian, my parents are Austrians, my wife is Spanish, 2 of my children are Americans, the 3rd one is Spanish, and I'm Austrian. So I have learned, I have learned to be a minority, and I've learned to actually have a very acute cultural sense. And this is very important because the world is very different. And when you then have the big opportunity, what I got early on in life, to work in Asia, to study in Asia, in the US, and in European countries, you not just broaden your skill set, you hone your instincts, and you also realize that there are many, many avenues to reach a certain goalpost. And you know all of this, so I don't have to really repeat it. But if I give you 3 examples, I mean, in the US, everybody knows that you can lead very much by objective setting, vision setting, objective setting, and then you basically work your plan, and the people will very much align themselves in doing so. And when you then go to Spain, for example, do we have Spanish colleagues here? Yeah, maybe. So the first thing what you realize is that you have to allow far more time for talking. So when you try to align the organization, the first principle what you have to adhere to is that you allow the teams to really, that they have a good talk among themselves. And then this is how you create alignment. But it's very, very important that you give this. You cannot just set it from the top and say, this is what we will do, and this is how it looks like, and these are the action steps, and I ask you to follow. Because they won't. But you get a very strong buy-in if you do it the other way around. When you then go to Asia, you have a very similar type of leadership requirement. You must make sure that you engage the organization from a bottom-up perspective, and then align it in different initiatives, top-down and bottom-up. And this is the privilege what I had in my life, that I grew up in different cultural environments. I worked in different environments, and this helped me a lot in terms of how I appreciate the diversity of the world, and also how to be most effective in cross-cultural teams, which is the true asset of a global company like ours.
And if we talk about, you have such a large organization, you talked about the young leaders that you have. I think for a group of high potential leaders like us, perhaps you could talk about...
By the way, this is exactly what I assume, because otherwise you wouldn't be here.
But let's talk about the other side of that. What do you think are the most common mistakes that you see young leaders in your organization make, and what could we learn from those mistakes?
Oh, this is a very broad question. Look, I mean, the first advice what I would have is, I mean, all of you are leaders, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But I think as leaders, being young or older, the first thing what we have to recognize is how privileged we are. And I give you now a quote what was a great learning for me from Jack Welch. I met Jack in the mid-90s through a benchmarking exercise. When I then joined the GE organization, he was on his book tour. And I met him in his signing with his latest books. So I said, Jack, I'm here, I'm now officer of GE. What is your one line of advice? You know what he gave me, one line of advice? Peter, give it all. Jack. And I think live your dreams and make sure that you live up to the capacity and what you have as individuals, and make a real contribution through the work what you do for others. And I think this is the great privilege what we have. This is what leaders have to think of in terms of what is their impact, not just from a economic perspective, but also ecological perspective, social perspective, and the impact what we have for many, many millions of people. And for me, it was always a great privilege. I spent many, many years of my life in the pharmaceutical business for a very simple reason, because I was enormously privileged to work on technologies and help people to live a better life and to survive. And when you then talk to patients and you feel really the impact what you have, this makes me very, very proud of. And that's a great privilege of being the CEO of Siemens, being in so many businesses. This is really the impact what a big organization like ours have is enormous. And that's an enormous, enormous privilege.
Okay, I have just shown you 18 minutes of the clip. The whole clip would be uploaded for you to go through it in detail. Out of these 18 minutes, what I have just shown you, the points which I have noted, that remember one thing, that change is a top-down process. Number two, for a change, you have to build trust relationships. As we have seen the organization, the Siemens Corporation, that they were suffering from leadership crisis and there was resistance. And rather than going for the evolutionary style of change, he preferred to go for evolutionary style of change. Then there were triggers from the environment, internal triggers and external triggers as well. Then he has to build up a team, then looking deep into the change phenomena, that how that whole thing can be adjusted and digested. And then obviously they have to win the stakeholder concerns. They have to understand the issues going on in everyday basis. And accordingly, they have to think and they have to decide that how this organization is going to maintain its long-term sustainability and how they are going to come out of this leadership crisis, which they eventually were facing. Okay. So remember that change is the greatest constant. And the managers need the new mindset to tackle with the situation with a more flexible, with a more, as the CEO was also saying, the major phenomena was the speed, that you always need to respond to the requirements with speed. He used the word for 3 times, speed, speed, and speed. Okay. So innovation, like coming up with the new ideas and new concerns and constantly changing conditions, so that whatever is going not in favor of the organizations should be digested and adjusted accordingly. Successful firms, we have just witnessed one of the firms in our video clip, successful firms share these traits. They are faster in their response. They are more quality conscious. They are more employee involved, as we have just seen that how the CEO was involved with his subordinates and making teams of the young people and always motivating them to come up with the leadership concerns. And then they are more customer oriented, and obviously they are smaller in their perspective. And by the word smaller, we mean to say they are more focused upon the requirements of the environment in which they are operating. Okay. So that is the major concern, which is also calling for local responsiveness concern, which is the norm of multi-domestic and transnational strategies. So when we talk about the change perspectives, remember that change would always go along with the socialization process. Okay, as we have just seen in the case of Siemens as well, the CEO was telling us his socialization procedure, that how he became socialized with the organization as the external member coming to the firm, how he socialized with the environment and with the organization. The socialization process is always a mandatory part of the change process. It says that a process that adopts employees to culture. We have to look into those details. New employees become aware of norms, employees encounter culture, and individuals understand power, status, rewards, and sanctions. And out of all that understanding, they would be there to demonstrate their capabilities and competencies to make the organization be in the win-win situation. When we talk about the socialization process, basically the new employee coming in at whatever level, starting from the CEO, coming down to the frontline employees. So every person joining an organization is always there with his or her own expectations. And whenever a new employee comes to an organization with new expectations, they encounter with organization's culture, as we have just witnessed the example in Siemens Corporation as well, that how the CEO encountered with the new culture of the organization and faced the leadership crisis. And once the organization culture is having an encounter with the new employees, the next step would be adjustment to cultural norms. With the passage of time, there would be the sharing of the values, and the cultural norms would be adopted, and that is the process in which we typically and technically call the phase of metamorphosis. And after going through the cultural norms and its adaptation, the next step would be that there would be the outcome, there would be the results, either in terms of performance or commitment or obtaining goals and goal achievement, or there can be otherwise the negative synergy, and which would be calling for the people to leave the organization, and they would not be adjusted and they would be suffering from the cultural shock. So this socialization process actually is always a part of a change phenomena. But whenever an organization is going to face a change, so they always go through this phenomena of socialization. When we talk about adjustment to cultural norms, the socialization can occur in three ways. And these are very interesting three ways. The first one is that there can be rebellion. Okay, which would mean the rejection of all values and norms, and that would result into rebellion. That would result into either the turnover, or you would be like acting like neglecting the organizational perspectives. Okay, you will be avoiding the situations, and you will be avoiding the responsibilities. The second adjustment, which can be the outcome of coping with cultural norms, would be the conformity, which means that acceptance of all values and norms. And there can be the third response, which is creative individualism, which is talking about acceptance only of pivotal values and rejection of others. Okay, so these are the three concerns of the employees when we talk about the change process. Now, why we are talking about the perspective of human element in the change concern? Because the biggest resistance is always coming from the humans. Usually structures don't resist, usually machines don't resist. So the resistance factor is always coming from the human element, and that resistance can either result into, when you talk about socialization in change perspective, can always result into either rebellion or conformity, or it can be coming up with creative individualism. Basically, creative individualism is like the in-between phenomena between these two extremes of rebellion and conformity. When you talk about rebellion, that is rejection. When you talk about conformity, that is acceptance. But when we talk about creative individualism, that would be acceptance only of pivotal values and rejection of all others. Okay, so that would be like a trade-off situation. There are certain models of change which we need to understand before we move further. The first model of change related to the change management and organizational development perspective is basically continuing process with emphasis on viewing organization as total system of interacting and interrelated elements. Now, that is the main reason for which I am always identifying that we have to look in the bigger picture. We have to talk about holistic perspectives. We have to take the whole system in our concern, that how organizational elements are interacting and they are interrelated. If we come up with a graphical representation of the organizational change model number one, it says that first step from where the change would start taking place is anticipate need for change. Second step would be develop the practitioner-client relationship. So that practitioner is actually the OD practitioner who is there to implement that change. The OD practitioner can be an external consultant, or that person can be even the CEO or some other organizational member who is responsible to bring in the change. So once the anticipation of the need is there and the practitioner is there to implement or to identify the change, the third step would be that the diagnosis would start. and we're going to diagnose the root causes of the problems or the issues, and we are going to see the cause and effect relationships. We're going to see the force field analysis. We're going to talk about these things in the later slides, and we also need to see that what are the and why are the requirements of change, and how we are going to respond to that particular requirement. The fourth stage would be action plans, strategies, and techniques, which we would be incorporating to implement that particular change. And the fifth step would be self-renewal, monitor, and stabilize. Remember that one of the objectives, the major objectives of the change process is that we have to bring in the self-renewal capability in the organization, because it is not always that for every nitty-gritty change you need to call an OD practitioner, or you need to call and change agent to come and tackle with it. Basically, organizational systems, organizational design should have or should incorporate the self-renewal capability to manage the change by its own self. And only when those self-renewal capabilities are challenged, that is the time when a totally different phenomena is coming in. And for that to address that particular situation, you need to call the external practitioner to come up and take up the agenda. There is another model for change, which is talking about that there are 4 steps in it. First one is appreciating change, then there is mobilizing support, then there is building change capability, and then it is talking about executing change. Let us discuss all these aspects in detail. When you talk about appreciating change, it is said that there are 2 ways in which an organization can change. Okay, those 2 steps are either the change is going to come up with an unplanned perspective, or the change is subjected to some planned phenomena. Okay, when the change is coming in with an unplanned perspective, that would take the shape of crisis management and disaster management. Whereas when we talk about planned change, that is the time when we are going to address the change with the details of the change management literature and project management concerns. But even once the crisis or the disaster has taken place, the after effects of the crisis and the disaster are to be dealt with planned change. Okay, so even the unplanned change can come in. We can never stop that. Actually, there are always exposures of different risks. You know, environmental risks are there, structural risks are there, technology risks are there. So risks are always there. Unplanned changes can always come in. But once the unplanned change in shape of a crisis or in a shape of disaster has taken up the organization, afterwards we address that crisis and disaster with a planned manner, with a process of change management, and with obviously the details we are going to discuss in the shape of project management. As we have just seen, as the CEO of the Siemens was saying, that there was a leadership crisis. Okay, so that leadership crisis in Siemens was not planned. It was an unplanned phenomena going on, and he has to address that unplanned phenomena with a planned scheme of thought. Okay, so first of all, we have to appreciate the change, appreciate the need for change. Okay, and obviously every change would have its own pros and cons. Every change would have its own consequences. And number C point in appreciating change is that option that you have for undertaking change in the organization. Okay, you have to see that what are the alternatives available to you. How can you address to that particular trigger? How can you address to that particular stimulus, which is basically calling for the need for change? At the same time, there is another warning that no change is sometimes the change required. Okay, remember one thing, that change is not like a magic. It's not abracadabra and things would be solved and benefits would be coming in. Change is a constant, I agree, but sometimes if the change is coming in and the change is causing problem, so you may have to stop that change. So you have to change the phenomena which are bringing in the change. Okay, to elaborate this concern, that why I'm saying that sometimes no change is the change required, I would like you to take to another clip, another demonstration in which very interestingly, it would be demonstrated that how change is needed and how change can be incorporated in particular situations. So for that matter, for that clip, I have to turn off the slides and I'm moving to that particular part of discussion.
No one will listen. Hey, Martin, what's wrong?
I've had enough of this. Every change I've suggested is knocked down. It's impossible to change anything around here.
And maybe your suggestions are no good?
That's nonsense. You know why it happens. Everybody knows. It's because people resist change.
Resist, 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 resist.
You are wrong. I don't resist change, and neither does the average Joe. Everyone has pushed for major changes in his or her life. Many young people leave their homes, choose to get married, pray for children, and show me somebody who resists the change of a promotion at work.
Can you really fool yourself that you don't resist change?
I resist only the changes that I have a good reason to resist. The others I accept.
Baloney!
Try me.
Okay, I'm game. Making a change is like climbing a mountain. Here's one. Climb it.
Don't think so.
Haha, you see? You do resist change.
I don't resist change. I resist this particular change because I don't have a reason to climb the mountain. I don't see the plus in the change.
Well, what's a good reason for you?
A higher salary, better health, or an improved relationship.
Okay, I'll take care of your excuse. There's a pot of gold waiting for you up there. Is that good enough? Now will you climb?
Nope.
Point proven! You most certainly resist change.
Of course I resist this change, and with good reason. See for yourself. Too much effort, too much time, too high a risk. It's perfectly logical. The minus of the change outweighs the plus of the change.
Another excuse. Fine, I'll reduce the required efforts and the risk. Now are you willing to climb?
I don't think so.
Aha! I knew it! Excuse after excuse. You remove one, another one pops up. The end result is still the same. The change is definitely good for you, and yet you still resist.
But it's not good for me. I don't want the change because I'm comfortable in my current situation.
Another excuse.
Not at all. You look at it too narrowly. No wonder people reject your suggestions.
What? I looked at both the plus and the minus sides of making the change.
Yes, but you've ignored the pluses of not changing. I like my profession. I like the city I'm in. I like my style of living. I like my mermaid. But she cannot climb the mountain with me.
You've just proved my point. Maybe you justified it logically, but at the end of the day, people will always resist change. They can simply declare that they have a mermaid, and there goes any chance of causing a change out the window.
I'm not looking for excuses, but unlike you, I'm not in love with your suggested change. I'm more objective.
Oh, so you're Mr. Objectivity, huh? The guy who only looks at the plus side of staying the same? Aren't there minuses as well?
I guess there are.
Think of situations that if things stay as they are, alligators will bite your ass off. Your firm may go bankrupt, or your spouse may ask for a divorce.
Of all the nerve!
Or your health will decline drastically. Aren't you fighting alligators?
Constantly!
Sometimes I feel that the people I try to convince are so busy fighting off the alligators that they should be climbing the mountain even if there is no pot of gold waiting at the top. Still, everybody resists change, including you.
Not at all. Show me how the pot is large enough for me, and the teeth of my alligator are sharp enough, and my effort and my risk to change is not as big, and that I don't have to give up on a beautiful mermaid, then I assure you I will climb the mountain.
That's what I do, and it doesn't work.
Really? Have you ever tried to present all four sides of your suggestion? Let me ask you a more pertinent question. Did you figure out in advance what the pot is for the person you're trying to convince? Not your pot, but his or her pot. What is his or her crutch? What are the alligators and the mermaids for the other party?
I guess not.
There you go. Also, when you concentrate on one aspect and the other person concentrates on another, you are bound to miscommunicate.
Looking at all 4 factors and doing it from the other party's perspective sounds like a lot of preparation. Are you sure it'll pay off?
Not if you believe that people are programmed to resist change, or any change.
I guess I'll never know unless I give it a try. I'll let you know how it went.
Share your experience. Post a video on youtube.com titled
So we have just gone through interesting detail of what change is and why and how and when you need to incorporate that particular change. And as I discussed with you, that sometimes no change is the change required, because many a times we are not focusing upon the plus side of the change and the minus side of the change. Sometimes we are ignoring the risks involved in that particular change. And sometimes we are overestimating that the change is going to act like a magic. Sometimes we are exaggerating the realities which are actually harmful for the organization as a whole, as a total. And we should be careful about the associations we have for the change. What are the triggers? Why do we need to go and address them? Okay. So here ends our second session. We're going to join our next session sharp at 7:30. Okay. So thank you for joining in this session. 7:30, we're going to resume our talk.